Hi, folks. Right now, I'd like to talk a little bit about Samson's bad choices when it came to women. Women was one of the was a downfall of Samson, and it was a problem throughout his life, as far as we can see in the Bible. Well, who was Samson? In the Old Testament, Israel was under the dominion of the Philistines, who had taken control of that area. Philistines, historically, they say they controlled the iron trade. They, at certain points in time, wouldn't let the Israelites have swords, and um, the Philistines were in charge of the iron and things like that. So they were a powerful powerful country, and they were dominating Israel. And the Lord there was an angel that came to Manoah and his wife and told them about Samson, who would be a Nazarite from birth. Now, Nazarite had a vow on him, and he wasn't allowed to cut his hair or drink wine or eat any grapes or grape products or other alcoholic, or wine or other alcoholic beverages. So they also had restrictions on them regarding touching dead bodies and various other things. So Samson was raised from the time he was born as a Nazarite. He had 7 locks of hair, and the Spirit of the Lord would come on him, and he'd become very, very strong and be able to do incredible feats. So this was Samson in the Old Testament, but Samson had a problem when it came to the women he chose, and we're going to learn a little bit about Samson and the types of things that he did. And you can study about Samson yourself in Judges chapter 14 through 16. Um, you can start in chapter 13. It tells about his birth, and then he tells his parents he sees a woman in the valley of Timnah, and he wants to marry her, and she's a Philistine. And then in Judges 14:3, it says, "Then his father and mother said to him, Is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren, or among all the people, that you must go and get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines?" And Samson said to his father, "Get her for me, for she pleases me well." But his father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord, that he was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Um, so now, actually, Samson wanting to marry this Philistine woman was of the Lord. But that doesn't mean that Samson's taste in women was good. Um, I personally think the Lord can use someone having bad taste in women, or Samson could have had some flaws in his choice of women, and the Lord still used that in an occasion against the Philistines. So we can actually learn some things, some of the at the very least, whatever the Lord's thinking on that matter is, at the very least, we can learn from Samson some of the difficulties of dealing with someone who is not one of God's people. Now, there were actually commands in the Old Testament against marrying the 7 nations who were Canaanite nations. The Philistines were actually related to the Egyptians, so they weren't Canaanites; they were Hamites. But they worshipped idols, and so that's a problem as well. But they weren't among the specific people groups that were forbidden to marry. So Samson um, married the woman, and they had 7 days of feasting. Well, had a bet going with some of the Philistine men there at the party, and he had killed a lion. The Spirit of the Lord came on him. He killed a lion, and then he came back, and he was a Nazarite. He wasn't supposed to be unclean, and Jewish people wouldn't do this normally. But he takes some honey that actually a beehive had formed in the lion. He takes some honey out of the lion and he eats it, and he has a riddle about eating this honey out of the lion. And he shares a riddle with the Philistines, and if they solve it within the period of time, they're supposed to pay him this sum of, well, I believe it was clothing and things of that nature. So they had a bet going, and if they couldn't solve it, they were supposed to pay him. Well, the men at the feast actually threatened his new wife, and so they threatened her and her family. So Samson's wife wept on him and said, "You only hate me. You do not love me. You have posed a riddle to the sons of my people, but you have not explained it to me. Then he said to her, Look, I have not explained it to my father or my mother, so should I explain it to you? I guess he still had loyalty to his mother, hadn't cleaved to his wife yet. um, Now she wept on him 7 days while their feast lasted, and it happened on the seventh day that he told her because she pressed him so much. Then she explained the riddle to the sons of her people. Now I wonder if Samson was attracted to manipulative, whiny women, or yeah, women that just whined and whined and until they got what they wanted. Now, I mean, she had some real motivation for wanting to do this, but this is the type of woman who could marry. Samson uh, gave into this type of manipulation. You don't love me. You only hate me. You don't love me. I imagine she must have said, "Oh, if you love me, you tell me the secret. You tell me what it is." So here, early in his love life, he has a woman nagging or pestering or whining at him, trying to get him to tell a secret, and he tells the secret. So after he tells the secret, then he has to pay up on the bet, and then um, after um, he attacks the Philistines or he harms the Philistines, and they go kill the family. And then so he gets upset and he really attacks the Philistines. And then the Israelites, the Philistines come and they're going to attack Israel. And if they don't hand over Samson, they hand over Samson, and he kills an army by himself. Later on, we read in Judges in Judges 15, before he kills the army and everything, he goes back to the father. He goes back to be with his wife after he had attacked the Philistines and everything, or I believe it was their grain fields at the time. Um, okay, I need to read this. Anyway, one of the attacks on the Philistines or their property, he goes back. He goes to her father. He wants his wife. He says, "I really thought that you thoroughly hated her. Therefore, I gave her to your companions. Is not her younger sister better than she? Please take her instead." Well, this is one of the problems with marrying someone who is not one of the people of God, who doesn't have the same values. This is this is adultery. They took his wife, who had already married him, and gave her away to another man to be his wife. So this was adultery. And hopefully a good Jewish family would know not to do something like that. Now Saul did something like that with his daughter, who had been married to David. But typically that wasn't the way the Jewish people should handle such a thing. That was his wife, and her father gave his wife away to another man, and then offered her younger sister instead of his wife, and that was forbidden for him to marry his wife's sister. So one of the problems is that if you marry somebody who's not of the same faith, is that they may have some very different values. Her family certainly had some different values, and I guess she went along with it and married the guy, whether she had a choice or not about it, we don't know. So one of the problems is a lot of people, when they're young and they're looking for a spouse, and whether you're a man looking for a woman or a woman looking for a man to get married, um, if you wait a long time and it seems like everybody else is getting married off and you're lonely, um, it can be very tempting to marry somebody who doesn't have godly values. Someone who's not a Christian, or someone who says they're a Christian but doesn't really live a Christian life. You should have that's an area where you should really have some standards. And the reason is, it may feel good to be loved and all this by somebody who's not of the same faith, but actually the divorce rates are higher when people of different religions get married than when people of the same, or actually it was, I believe that there's a factor there, but actually marrying somebody who goes to church regularly has a lower chance of divorce. Now, if they profess to be Christians or profess to be born again Christians, that doesn't necessarily in the U.S. lower the chances of getting a divorce. But if someone is actively involved in church, a lot of people have, been told, repeat this prayer and you're born again. That doesn't mean they've repented. It doesn't mean they believe the gospel. They've gone through a ritual, and if they didn't have any faith, then they've just been told they've been born again, and they'll fill it out on the survey or respond to the survey they've been born again. But anyway, so it's very important that you marry somebody of the same faith who because, think about the things you're going to do together. You're going to live your life together. And if you really want to serve God, if you're a real believer and you have the Holy Spirit in you and leading you, then you're going to want to live your life a certain way that pleases God. You're going to want to give some of your money away. Now, if you marry an unbeliever, what unbeliever is going to want to give away some huge percentage of their income, especially to Christian causes and evangelism and to your church? So that can cause, just in your day-to-day life, that can cause your life to be very unpleasant in a lot of ways. Now, if you've already married an unbeliever, the Bible says if your unbelieving spouse is willing to dwell with you, let him not leave her, let her not leave him. So, um, yeah, go, walk in whatever the Lord has called you in. And if you've made a mistake, you may have some in your decisions and things. Not all of us make all the best decisions all the time. That doesn't mean God can't redeem and use your life. But if you are in a situation where you've never married, don't compromise on this. Marry somebody who loves the Lord, who has the same values. Another big thing is raising children. Could you imagine if you were a Christian and you want to raise your children to love and fear God, and you marry somebody and they say, well, I've decided marry someone who's not a Christian, and they become very anti-Christian, and they're teaching atheism to your kids or teaching some other religion. You marry someone who's into New Age one week and Buddhism the next, and they're teaching your children to worship idols and things like that, which is just totally in conflict with what you teach your children. So it's very important for you to think about that, and also to think about before you get married, does the other person want to have children? If they don't and you do, that's a really big deal right there too. So that's another thing to consider, not so much related to this passage. But um, so we see in Judges 16, it says, now Samson went to Gaza and saw a harlot there. That's old-fashioned language for prostitute, and went into her. Then the Gazites were told, Samson has come here. They surrounded the place and lay in wait for him all night at the gate of the city. They were all quiet all night, saying, in the morning, when it is daylight, we will kill him. And Samson lay low until midnight. Then he arose at midnight, took hold of the doorposts of the city and the two great posts, pulled them up, bar and all, and put them on his shoulders, and carried them to the top of the hill that faces Hebron. Okay? So now here we see a problem with Samson. Now there's no like death penalty for sleeping with a prostitute in the Old Testament. It's Judaism frowned on that. That was considered to be immoral activity. Um, and if a girl played the harlot in her father's house, if she slept around and was married off as a virgin, there's also some deception there, kind of fraud. But she could be stoned for playing the harlot in her father's house, and then she was also married off as a virgin too. So anyway, this was a serious thing, but there wasn't like a death penalty if someone was a prostitute and she didn't get married. That's listed in the Old Testament, or for a man sleeping with a prostitute. But the New Testament condemns that, and speaks against that type of activity, and says it's God's will that you abstain from fornication. So anyway, this was a bad thing that Samson was doing, but it's not like it was the same thing as committing adultery with a married woman, and according to the laws there. So anyway, he went. This is Gaza, one of the Philistine cities. So he's apparently still likes the Philistine women. And then he goes and he sleeps with a prostitute, and they're going to kill him, but he gets out of the town in time. So it says, and afterward it happened that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him and find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So they bribed her for this incredible amount of money. And Delilah said to Samson, please tell me where your great strength lies, and with what you may be bound to afflict you. And he lies to her. He says, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings, yet not dried, then I shall become weak as any other man. So the lords of the Philistines gave her the bowstrings, and she said, Samson the Philistines, she ties him up. She says, Samson the Philistines are upon you. He broke the bowstrings. And then she says, look, you've mocked me and told me lies. Now please tell me what you may be bound with. So he said to her, if they bind me securely with new ropes that have never been used, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Therefore Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and he said to him, the Philistines are upon you, Samson. And men were lying in wait, staying in the room. But he broke them off his arms like a threat. I assume they're still hiding. He doesn't know they're in the room. Delilah said to Samson, "Until now you have mocked me and told me lies. Tell me what you may be bound with." Then he said to her, "If you weave the seven," he's getting close to the truth here. "If you weave the 7 locks of my head into the web of the loom." So she wove it tightly with the batten of the loom and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he awoke from his sleep and pulled the batten and the web from the loom. Then she said to him, "How can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? You've mocked me these 3 times and have not told me where your great strength lies." And it came to pass when she pestered him daily with her words and pressed him, so that his soul was vexed to death, that he told her all his heart and said to her, "No razor has ever come upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I am shaven, then my strength will leave me, and I will become weak and be like any other man." And so then Delilah does it. The Philistines capture him. He thinks he's going to shake himself free like at other times, but he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Then the Philistines took him and put out his eyes, and they had him grinding grain in the prison. And then later his hair grew, his strength came back. He knocked the Philistine temple down, took out a bunch of enemies with him. So anyway, what do we see here? It doesn't say that he married Delilah, um, but he's sleeping over at her house. Okay, so maybe he's shacking up with this woman, and he's probably, they're probably engaging in some activities they should be engaging in. He didn't have a problem with, or he was willing to sleep with a prostitute, so he's probably, what he could have been doing with this woman. And so this is, we also see something else you don't want to, something that got Samson into trouble: fornication, shacking up. Now, if he hadn't been probably he'd been sleeping with Delilah. He's sleeping at her house. What's he doing sleeping at her house so she can tie him up while he's asleep? He's over there, not married to her. If he had picked a nice, godly woman who wasn't going to betray him and actually married her, now he's just some kind of a boyfriend here. I mean, he's not providing for her. Maybe he is a little bit or whatever, but there's no, apparently, if he's not married her, there's not a real commitment here. And so, what kind of quality relationship can he expect to have? So, this is something that you need to consider. If you want to marry a woman, and she's just willing to fornicate with you, and she's willing to, let you sleep over at her house all the time, that's not a good quality relationship. Now, she could repent and she could get right with the Lord. And if you're willing to do that, if you're a man in the relationship, be a leader in terms of the morality in the relationship. Don't think it just saying sexually moral is all a girl's responsibility. As a man, you need to be able to stay sexually moral. We have other examples in the Bible we have Joseph, who was tempted with adultery by Potiphar's wife. She was trying to get him to sleep with her. And he ran out of the room. She grabbed the robe, and he was in such a hurry to get out of there, he left his robe behind. And she had it in her hand and claimed that he tried to rape her. So, but anyway, he was a man who feared God, and he ran away from the sexual sin. Now, he was a normal man. He wasn't gay or anything. He got married later and had kids, and but he loved God enough that he feared God enough, and he knew better than to commit adultery. So he fled from the sexual sin. The New Testament says to flee from fornication. So Samson had maybe that if Samson, maybe he was fornicating with this woman. If he hadn't been doing that, if he hadn't been sleeping over at her house, then this may not have happened to him. Another thing is his choice in women may not have been the best choice. He's marrying someone who's manipulative here. Now, you think he would catch on. Why is she trying to find out the secret of my strength? Why does she need to know what makes me strong? Why does she assume that there's some secret to it? So what is she getting at? But sometimes guys don't really think things through with their mind, and he's certainly emotionally tied to Delilah here, and it's probably he's getting some sexual affection that he probably wants from this woman, and other types of affection and emotional needs being met. But um, he's also married. He's also hanging around with a girlfriend here who manipulates him. Oh, if you love me, you tell me, that kind of thing. Now, Proverbs actually warn about a contentious woman. And one of the types of contentious women is an angry woman. Proverbs 21:19 says, better to dwell in the wilderness than with a contentious and angry woman. Proverbs 25:24 says, it is better to dwell in a corner of a housetop than in a house shared with a contentious woman. And this is from a man who had a lot of wives back then. So, or I'm assuming that's Proverbs of Solomon. I'd have to look it up. But anyway, it says a continual dripping on a very day and a contentious woman are alike. Doesn't stop. Keeps going. Drip, 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 drip. Whoever restrains her restrains the wind and grasps oil with his right hand. You can't, you know, grab oil and pick it up and whack something with it. It's oil, and you're trying to stop the wind from blowing. It's very difficult. It just goes on and on and on. Well, Samson had nagging women in his life. First his wife, and then this girlfriend of his um, named Delilah. Now we don't know if Delilah was Jewish. There's, the people debate whether she was Jewish, and some people think she was a Philistine. If she's a Philistine, why would she have to be bribed to give up Samson? Maybe she had some feelings for him, but not enough to counteract her feelings for this huge amount of money. Or maybe she was Jewish and she needed to be bribed in order for them to convince her to give him up. But whatever the case, we don't know what her background was. We don't know if she was an idol worshiper or whatever. But what we do know is that she nagged at him and nagged and nagged and nagged and nagged and nagged until he gave up his secret and he lost his strength. So let this be a lesson to the young man out there, or your old man too, who haven't married, who are looking for a wife, and you want to find certain characteristics in a wife. You can read the last of the chapter of Proverbs and the last chapter of Proverbs, and it gives you a lot of characteristics there to look for a noble woman, a woman who fears the Lord. Um, but what you want to avoid is a contentious woman. And a contentious woman could be kind of loud and angry, or she could be nagging, and it just turns into a fight and an argument, and she doesn't know when to be quiet. And it can be a kind of a manipulative or even an abusive type thing, where you have somebody who she just pushes to get her way through nagging or through being angry, things like that. So for the men out there, and for women out there, the Proverbs warns about an angry man. You want to be careful to stay away from a man who's angry all the time. You want to have both men and women. You want someone who's, it's a good thing if the person's emotionally stable and not, the type that's manipulative, and especially for men, you don't want a woman to be too pushy and or try to get her way all the time, because wives are supposed to submit to their husbands, and that kind of goes against that. Now, another thing to keep in mind is, even if you marry a really wonderful woman, there may be times when she could kind of get into nagging or being contentious, or when you have an argument, anybody seems contentious. But and also, if you are a woman and you just really prod and poke at a man enough, you might make him angry too. That doesn't mean he's normally an angry man, but every human being, we're human beings and we can have faults. And when you're looking for somebody to marry, you got to realize that there's all these great things about women. You can read about the Proverbs 31 woman and all these things. Um, but people also have shortcomings, and you need to be able to accept your spouse's shortcomings. But while you're out looking for a spouse, if you do find a woman who, she gets upset and she throws plates around and she's getting upset a lot, you find a man, he's, throwing a barbell across the room at you because he's angry at you or whatever. You don't want to. That's a big warning sign. So my advice to you would be to watch for guys. Watch out for a woman who is contentious by nature. Now anybody can get upset and get in an argument, but if somebody who's just a continuous, like a drip on a rainy day, it just doesn't stop and it goes on and on and on and on. Think about this. Hey, watch out. Another thing is, avoid fornication. And just from a sense of ethics, like if you're a guy and you're dating this girl and you take in her virginity, and in the Old Testament, if you took a virgin's virginity, they could compel you to marry her. Her father would let you. Um, and there's some ethical responsibilities there. Some guy goes out, he gets a woman pregnant, and she's got his baby, um, and then he figures out, well, this woman's kind of contentious, but he's already, gotten her pregnant. If he's taken her virginity, he's gotten her pregnant. There's some sense of social, moral obligations. It's a lot different if you're in that situation than if you've just been innocently dating and treating her more, in terms of physical contact, more like a sister and not some sort of sexual relationship. So that's a lot different than if you go out and get a woman pregnant and say, "Oh, she's contentious. I'm not gonna," So don't fornicate with people. Don't go out fornicating, and don't put yourself in a situation where you've got a baby to raise and you need a mother and a father to raise the baby that was born out of wedlock. You want to do things the right way. Um, Guys, ask her father if she's got a father. It's a lot of girls, women have a father who's in the picture, who's there. Um, Ask her father if you can have her hand in marriage. Do things in an honorable way, and respect her and her family, before you get married. So, um, anyway, there's a lot of things that we can learn from Samson. Samson had maybe some sort of a taste in women that caused him to marry or date or spend time with women who would nag, manipulate, um, use, put other interests in front of him, especially Delilah, who loved money. That's another little warning from Samson. Samson was dating a very materialistic woman. And I wonder if he was going out and buying stuff for her and she was wanting more and more and he couldn't provide it. And here these Philistines came and offered this huge amount. I'm just speculating about Samson providing. I'm not sure what he could do. But he apparently was with a materialistic woman. That's another thing to watch out for, guys. Samson was with a he hadn't really shifted his loyalty to his wife during that wedding feast with the question he asked about, I haven't told my father and mother. But, um, she had some motivation to be somewhat disloyal to Samson because, well, or not to tell Samson her reasons for wanting to know about the bet. But the Delilah, um, about the riddle, but Delilah, this was there's no excuse for this. She's betraying this man's life in exchange for silver. So another thing to watch out for is you want to find someone who's loyal. Now she may not be loyal to you yet because you're not her husband. And in a friendship, as your friendship develops with her, then hopefully she'll display some loyalty to you, and certainly as you get close to marriage. But you can see in her relationships to other people, is she loyal? Is she a loyal person? Does she betray other people? You want to look at her values. Does she have biblical values, values that the people of God are supposed to have? Is she contentious? Does she nag? And does she fear the Lord? So these are things that you can look at when you're dating a woman, when you're considering a woman for marriage. Don't make the same mistakes that Samson made, and hopefully they can help keep you out of trouble. Thank you very much for watching this video. I hope it was a blessing for you. If you know somebody who needs to watch this, feel free to share the link with them. Thank you very much.